Welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Optimizing Cash Flow, the Key to Receivables Modernization. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we discuss the modernization of cash application processes with efficient integration strategies. Our speakers for today are Nathan Dixon, Senior Product Manager Receivables at Deluxe, and Craig Jeffery, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Nathan and Craig, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome, everyone. We're so glad you could spend some of your afternoon, evening, or morning with us. Nathan, it's good to present with you. This is our first webinar that we've done together, so I'm looking forward to it.
For sure. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate you having me on.
It's great. So we have a lot to cover in the next 59 minutes. And so let me go through what our agenda is. We'll be touching on these 6 areas. So when we look at cash application from invoice to reconciliation, we'll begin looking at what are some of the multiple steps and the perspectives of cash and efficiency. Those play a significant role in this process. We'll move over to challenges. What are some of the pain points of cash application? There's a number of steps, and information can be lost partway through the process. Then we'll move over to pitfalls of integration. The idea of manual processes having to be automated. Whenever things are manual, moving to automated, there's always a handoff and a challenge. And those represent some of the pitfalls of integration. Then we'll look at the opportunities, particularly where automation can help. Streamlining a process helps. Leveraging automation can help smooth that process out as well. And then the idea of full automation, moving as much of the process to fully automated from end to end, is a typical goal for most organizations to the extent that you can achieve that. Then at the end, Nathan and I will talk about some of the takeaways, what we need to consider, and what we want to make sure you leave today's session with. So thank you so much for joining us. That's our agenda. And let's jump into the topic. And for many of these slides, you'll know I'll start off the discussion, and Nathan will come in with the heavy, meaty material. So we'll begin with cash application. Nathan, as we look at this, we see from invoice all the way to ERP posting, we see different steps and handoffs along the way. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So cash application is a specific part of the order to cash workflow, right? Which is the invoice generation all the way to posting that matched payment that's income against the invoice and having that reconciled in your ERP. So in the steps here, you'll see there's invoice, payment received, remittance collected, the payment to invoice matching, and then the exceptions resolved. And I'll talk a little bit about each of these steps, right? So first, we generate an invoice for the customer that you have. And then as that invoice sits in your billing system, eventually that payment will be received or come into your system. And typically, depending on the type of payment, there is some remittance that'll come with it. Sometimes you'll get remittance through another means, so it has come in through a different channel, not through the direct payment itself. And someone basically is trying to coordinate these various payments against these various remittances, and then trying to make a match for that payment against that invoice. Occasionally also you'll have some issues. So let's say some of the information doesn't actually line up, or you're missing a documentation. Those can then get marked as exceptions, which then need to be resolved. And basically at the end of the day, once everything's matched together, that is posted to the ERP or reconciled within the ERP to basically close that off, and then you can recognize that capital. And there's a few different opportunities when we're introducing a cash application product for how we can kind of improve this process, right? So on the remittance piece and the payment piece, right, we can use data capture either via OCR, so optical character recognition, which is basically we're able to scan something and pull out the field information from it. And we can couple that with like an AI or a machine learning model, basically to understand what that piece of information is and whether or not it's valuable or not as a remittance for the payment set of income. And then taking that to the next step, right? Typically, you'll create rules in kind of some of the traditional systems. The technology these days, though, obviously have moved pretty far forward, especially with AI and ML becoming a much bigger part of the puzzle. So what we can have is we can have an ML model kind of sitting within that cash application service to take a look at all that information that's come in, been standardized, and use that for matching as well. This is kind of coupled on top of rules, so you can kind of hard code rules typically within these solutions as well. So say you have something coming in from a certain pair or something over a certain value that you want to always be manually reviewed, you're able to do so as well. And then typically anything that can't be matched or is matched, not up to a certain confidence threshold rating, could be marked as an exception or be put into a different order to cash workflow. Again, we're trying to take away a lot of the manual work that someone would have to do here. And then eventually, again, that would go back to the ERP as a reconciled payment, so that, again, capital could be recognized. Not sure if there's anything you want to add there as well, Craig.
Yeah, that was a great step through on those. One of the things that always comes to mind is anytime there's a manual handoff or there's something where it's not being digitally transferred, there's opportunities for errors, and those defects create this feedback loop to correct them as you were describing, but also they slow down the process. They impact the efficiency and working capital. So a big impact on that flow. So thanks for your step through of that.
No worries. And then typically, right, you have like a team of people that are handling just that cash application process. Like you said, it's a very time intensive and there's a lot of opportunity for human error.
Yeah, this next image of, what's the problem? We have three areas, and Nathan will talk through these. The first one touches on the complexity of the variety of payment types. Pay with paper, plastic, pen, or whatever. You got all of that. And then you have the aspect of complexity of portals and handling these different inboxes and methods of touching it. And then the impact and feedback to liquidity. So those are three of the significant problems in the mess of B2B payments. Maybe you could take us through this problem in some more detail.
Sure. So I'll start off with number one here. So payments from different sources, right? So if you think you've got, lockbox, so paper payments coming in, you've got ACH payments coming in, you have wire payments, card payments, whatever it is. They'd be going through like a bill pay service. So the formats of all of these payments can be different, right? They can be different payment file formats. And typically the remittances, right, they'll come in separately. I think with lockbox payments, typically you do have the remittances coming in with that for the majority of them, but like an ACH or a wire, typically those remittances are not going to come alongside. So going over to number two, right? Staff typically have to navigate between various portals to find all the incoming payments. They'll probably have to have their email box open to check for any remittance advice that was sent along with the payment. Think like an ACH payment has come in and it's paying 5 different invoices. The payer might have sent along an email that's describing basically what that ACH payment is for and how it should be applied to the invoices they currently have open. So just even this, right? Imagine the time of having to figure out, these different payments. I've got to reconcile the field values and I have to navigate between all these various pieces just to understand, from a baseline, what I should be applying to what invoices. And then this all affects the efficiency, right, of the working capital or what money is available to my company. So again, if I have a team of people that have to work through all these, it can be varying levels of complexity. That's going to slow down basically my ability to use that capital to further invest in my company. And then if I want to try and do reporting on this or try and derive some sort of insights from this information as well, it's difficult again if I'm having to bounce between the different file formats and the different portals to access this data.
I think that was excellent. So if you're listening and your role is core treasury, you're probably resonating more with when Nathan talked about working capital and the focus on those elements. But at the same time, as you think of those efficiency aspects and the challenges and complexity that someone in AR faces, those have a feedback loop onto what you may care about the most. So caring about all of that has an impact if you're in treasury. If you're in AR, the focus on the complexity is the life you live, and straightening those out makes perfect sense. But that feedback loop, the people from treasury or other areas of finance are yelling and saying, we need to get this money collected, not just by the end of the month, but at different times and applied and running through the system in an efficient way. So each area, whether you're in AR, AP, or sales, or treasury, understand the overall flow helps you focus on the company and the financial process more effectively. So just some good thoughts to think through areas beyond your direct and immediate responsibility. As we shift over to the challenge of integration, again, we're talking about pain points and how do we solve those pain points. We're going to share this slide. I'll start on the first one, manual processes. They may be familiar and predictable, but they're prone to defects or errors. They create there's more opportunities for errors. There's more opportunities for defects, which ruin the efficiency, which may be the first concern of AR, but they also impact collection relationship, which treasury will care about. They can harm relationships, as we said, which can impact overall sales and performance. I'll be happy to jump back in again, Nathan, but I just stole the first one from you, so I'll see how you can adapt to that.
For sure. So I'll go into number 2 here. So new systems introduce unfamiliar interfaces and potential process changes, which can raise concerns about the ability to enable cash flow. And we do see this, right? So we're introducing a platform, like you said, that's replacing a lot of these manual processes, which they could have been doing for years. People are comfortable. And as you're bringing in a new system, there's always concern about, will something get missed? Will my current cash flow ability, be degraded for a short period of time while this new platform is being integrated? So there's a lot of, not really risk, but just people are unsure sometimes when you're introducing something new. So when you're basically, if we go over to point number 3 here for successful integration, these two are kind of coupled together. When you're looking at a platform that you can introduce, you want typically someone where there's, the platform comes along with additional services for things like, help or implementation for training your users. You want to be able to have something where you can test out the product in, like, they call it a UAT environment, but it's a user acceptance testing environment. So basically everything can be set up, and then you can test out the environment. You can see how your data is populated inside of there. People can go through and look at their manual processes that they're doing today and see basically how can they apply those manual processes in a new way within this platform that's here as well. Especially with things like, the advent of APIs just being more broadly used within the applications and how the data is more easily presentable. You'll want to have like a lot of tools where the setup can be done within the tool. You don't need like a developer or someone actually coding to make configuration changes. I find for integration, just for the smooth of it, having a lot of that control, like an admin interface where you can do a lot of the setup or make changes if you need to, if you find an issue with one of the processes, having that ability to do so inside the tool really alleviates a lot of that concern as well. The biggest thing, like I was talking about before, but as soon as you're able to test it out before you have that go live, I find that's like, again, one of the big things for just, calming down those fears of bringing in kind of a new system. Again, we can show how that data comes in, how it'll all look for someone, and then we can show how that's posted to the billing system or ERP as well.
Yeah, excellent. That idea of new systems, there's this constant flow of new systems, either your counterparty or your acquiring companies. There's always this era of change and needing to integrate. It's a continual process in many cases.
Yeah, and we do see a lot these days, right? Like the billing systems themselves are, API for it as well. So there is like connectivity that you can do on that side of it. And we see a lot of, or I see a lot of, I guess, worry for companies that have done acquisitions where, there may be multiple ERPs or, multiple levels of manual processes from, a book of business that was acquired and merged into another, but they have been fully integrated. So it's interesting, looking at it from that point of perspective as well. But there are a lot of tools these days that kind of handle that level of flexibility or needed flexibility as well.
All right, we are at our first poll question. It's going to appear on your screen. It is a multiple choice poll question, meaning you can select more than one option if they're valid for your organization. So look at the question. It says, where does your organization currently face the most friction in the cash application process? Where is it the biggest challenge, right? Is it in matching payments to invoices, handling exceptions and errors, all the way down to we don't experience major issues, other, or ensure? So once you select all those, go ahead and submit. Brian has posted in the chat box some notes about where to find the polls or quizzes chart if it's not showing up or if it's behind some other image or behind a screen. If your company blocks those types of pop-ups. You may not see it, but just you can look and see what Brian has written if you can't locate it. Once you've submitted it, if you would go ahead and follow Deluxe on LinkedIn or Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn, this is great to go ahead and click that. And then I see people are well trained. This is awesome. Type if we get 100 and 175 people who type the word Deluxe in, poll will work as well. You type that into the chat box. We will send everyone the poll results. So what you see on the screen with the poll question behind it, says poll question, that will be replaced with the poll results. And if we get 175 of those, we'll send those back to you. So just type the word Deluxe and that will come your way. So the poll is closed. And Nathan, if you take a quick look at that,
Yeah.
number 1 is handling exceptions and errors. 2 is matching payment. 2 is manual ERP posting and reconciliation. 3 is matching payments invoice. I know this is your sweet spot as a company, but anything you notice on these responses, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the core of the cash application, right? So we've got the initial matching of payments to invoices, which, is typically the bulk of your work where the data is technically okay, but it's so disparate across the various systems that that's just complex in itself. And it's interesting to see actually the handling of exceptions and errors. So I guess when a payment has come in and there's something wrong, like a document was missed or, the payer wrote something down incorrectly or paid the incorrect amount, um, basically kind of how we're meant to handle those is very interesting. And I think the technology these days is much better at recognizing those exceptions and presenting those up front. Um, so that's interesting to see. And then ultimately, yeah, I would expect like kind of the manual ERP posting to be a big one. I mean, at the end of the day, right, you want all your invoices to be closed as in an automated fashion as possible. So being able to provide that function is definitely like a table stakes for me. So interesting to see, I guess, what collecting remittance data, 23%, which is good to see. I mean, it probably goes hand in hand with the matching payments to invoices and handling of exceptions and errors, because like typically you can't do a match unless that remittance data is collected. So I'm assuming there's a lot of users out here who have, an issue kind of collecting that remittance, whether they're doing it through email or other means. So yeah, it's actually pretty even. That's pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, excellent. And I'm told by Brian that we need 49 more. I guess we have 126 responses to the various chat channels. So if we get those extras, we will go ahead and send them in. Appreciate everyone responding and engaging. Thanks for your comments on that, Nathan.
Yeah, I
Um,
appreciate it.
I think you're kicking this slide off about opportunities for innovation, and I'll jump in on
Yeah,
the third one.
this is an exciting one, right? So this is like where some of the new stuff is coming in. So opportunities for innovation. So, I mean, onboarding has always been kind of traditionally a pain point for these sort of products, right? There's getting the payment files and having them come into a system is a lot of work, right? There's a lot of requirements that need to be gathered, definitions that need to be make sure they're correctly understood. And the tools these days are much better at kind of transforming the data and ingesting that. So I'm gonna start with the ingest side of it. So typically when we're setting one of these up, right, the payment files either need to come from your payment processors or your bank after the payment's been deposited in most cases. And a lot of the time back in the day, right, there was a very specific file format that those files would need to be in to be ingested into a system. And these days, with the help of like machine learning, the transformers are a lot more open-ended. So basically, you can just take like kind of the raw Nacha file or the file as the banks are kind of exporting it, send it over to these sort of tools. And they're much better at taking that data and then setting it up for the next step, which is that unified data model, which I'll dive into a little bit more. And then similar on the extract side, right, getting an extract that's specifically configured for your ERP or billing system can be a complex process. And we see these days a lot of the time people are moving towards more standards or specific file formats for the ERPs, as we have a lot of big players in the space. And then as these standards are kind of used, there's like a certain level of configuration that can be applied to fit the specific configuration of how their ERP or billing was set up. And now I would say probably within the last year, I've seen a big uptick on both customers and the banks inquiring about API-based integrations, which for me is huge, right? if you're moving files back and forth between systems, there's always the possibility for like an error, right? Like a file gets dropped, a file isn't provisioned correctly or provisioned at all. Sometimes it's hard to do a reconcile check if everything's, broken out into individual files. So with the API, right, that's going to be more real time. So as payments are coming into the system or as payments are closed off and matched or reconciled, being able to take those in from banks or send them over to an ERP immediately provides like a big level of, I guess, protection against the data, right? You can reconcile it. It's much easier to see if something drops. And you can do like a status check on these sort of services much easier. And even for other, types of like not payment or posting files, but the remittances as well, being able to bring that in, or even like kind of advancing what I can do with an ERP or billing system integration. So being able to bring over the customer information, or if, a remittance advice comes in and asks to update a customer account, that can be sent back to the ERP or billing system with the intent of updating that as well. So there's a lot more additional automation we can also apply when we get to that level of integration.
I have a question for you and for others about the first one where we talked about ingest and extract. I always remember, ETL systems, extract, transform, and load. And it seemed like we used to use those terms, extract, transform, and ingest seemed to become popular about a decade ago. That's when it seemed like all of a sudden we say ingest. I'm just wondering how many people, like, when did that become so popular? Was it 10 years ago? If you want to type in the chat when that became more common, I would just love to see that, right? 10. Someone's agreeing with me. That's perfect. Give that person extra credit. I like it. No, but I mean, like, if it was became more common 5 years ago or 3 years ago or 15, I would just love to see what people think. When you're going through that, it seemed like, Nathan, you're talking through some of the third element as well. I didn't know if you wanted me to expand on that some more, or if you were really mostly focused on the first couple. So
That was mostly in the first. Let me touch a little bit on the second as well, because I think this is,
okay.
dig a little bit deeper into that. So with a lot of the systems these days, right, they have like a data model within the platform, and this is very important. Again, we talked about kind of that disparate systems in one of the earlier slides where you're looking at various systems and they're exporting, various payment file formats. So having a unified data model is incredibly important. I can take all that data, regardless of the source, remittance, payment, invoice information, bring it all in, and I can basically assign it to a singular data model. And when you're looking for tools that can do this sort of thing, you want to make sure it's something where I can do this sort of mapping within the application. I still have the ability to kind of handle custom fields or custom values specific to my type of business, but I should really be trying to get all that information to one data model. That way, when you're doing things like Cash App automation, I'm not having to write specific rules for the specific sources of data. I can basically say I have this one data model. Everything I do after that normalization of the data into that data model can run off that one set of field values or field labels. So if I'm doing Cash App, I'm training a machine learning model. I'm going to do reporting. I just, trying to do a basic search, or I'm trying to derive insights across all my data without having kind of that unified data model. It's very difficult to do, right? It just increases that complexity, tenfold. So that's super important, and really that's a lot of the value of these systems is how well can they get the data into that singular model so we can do everything else with it. And even as you start to add on other order to cash workflows, like things like collections, again, that data model just becomes so important. Um, so that I just wanted to make sure I covered that second point there a little bit deeper. And as you pointed out, right, that does tie into the machine learning side of it. So when you look at machine learning models, right, like the fields themselves are assigned like a weighting. So typically when you're loading up sets of data to train the model kind of derives a weighting for each of the fields, right? So the model might understand, hey, for this customer, this field is very valuable in the matching. This is kind of, considered their number two after the dollar amount, because dollar amount is typically number one. So again, if I have all my payment sources or my invoices or my remittance advice all working off of different field labels, that can confuse the machine learning model. There are ways to tackle that as well, but I mean, it's just so much simpler just to get everything into that data model or that unified data model. And then I can train up that machine learning model. And again, like it can do more than just the cash application, right? Like the machine learning model should be able to also provide, insights. So if you're thinking, hey, I'm getting these payments from this particular payer, but they're typically late or they're typically going to collections, again, regardless of where the payment's coming in or how that information's coming in, if it's all against that one model, the machine learning should be able to identify that trend and even present that to the users. So it can be proactive in kind of fixing future issues as well. So it's really interesting kind of the way it's going. And being able to just throw large sets of data that the model can understand against it, it's pretty cool what we can do with it.
Yeah, the old I always think of every time you call on the phone and you get some touch tone tree, and it's like it says click 8 to go back to the main menu, or it's not giving you the options you want. You feel like, okay, that's somebody created a tree that's very rigid. It's a rule. There's one pathway, and it's not flexible until they update the system later. But this idea of using artificial intelligence, the machine learning component, to learn as you go, or to spit it back to the human, bring back a human in the loop to solve it and to be more intelligent, is certainly a force multiplier and very powerful. Are you hearing me, Dave? Nathan, you can hear me fine?
Yeah, I can hear you right.
Okay. Some people are reporting no sound, so sorry about that, everybody. Um, and that brings us to addressing some of the key needs, and maybe you could start us off on this one as well.
Sure. So, we talked about it quite a bit in the last slide as well, but consolidation of that disconnected data is one of the biggest things. So if you talk just integrated receivables, I'm taking, again, all those sources of payment and I'm connecting them together in a single view for that user, right? Again, I want to I don't have to go to 10 different portals or sign into a bunch of different places or open up my mailbox and try and sort through my mail to find this information. If I can bring it all in, normalize it to one place where I can create my own queries against it or filter against it however I want, that's a very powerful thing. Not sure if you want to add anything there, but for me, that's one of the biggest pieces, and that makes my job so much easier as a product person to talk about when I want to add in new features. I know I can work against just a single model. I'm reducing the complexity of how I want to implement or add in new features because I'm assured that I'm always working against like integrated data.
I the way I would not the way I would explain it, but the way I would give a mental visual to someone about why what you're talking about, this integrated data model, is so important. If we have this linear process of data moves from one place to another, maybe from several sources, and it's a handoff to a handoff to a handoff, versus it's an integrated model. There's you'd say one version of the truth and one place to look, and it resolves so many of those issues and challenges. It's a different design. It's engineered as opposed to like the telephone game, right? You know how the messages change, errors get introduced into the process. When you have that unified model, you eliminate so many of those places for problems. And that's, when I hear you saying that, that's the thing that makes that resonate in terms of how powerful it is.
Yeah, and you actually talked about it a little bit before, but like a salesperson, right, who's part of the organization, right? So I mean, today they'd have to reach out to like the treasury or the AR teams to find some of that information. With a lot of these tools, right, they're permission controlled. You can set particular roles. So even for a salesperson, if they want to look at which customers they have at the organization, and they can see, hey, someone's starting to spend a lot more money, I should possibly engage with them, see if there's anything else I can sell. There's other value adds that like a platform that integrates all this data can really provide. So again, it's just having that data together is just a very powerful thing.
Yeah, and tying that into the resolution of payment issues, you can think of different challenges with payments. One, I can't see when I'm getting paid, so I have to follow up. I create a defect, or I create an exception or a manual response out of somebody, whether it's by email or by phone. So lack of information can create an issue. Visibility at the right level can solve those issues. And when you think about when you have questions or answers, if I can self-serve really quickly and readily, that's perfect. I don't need to call someone, get them to do that. If I can easily do that, like to your example, Nathan.
Yeah,
And then sometimes you need a person because it's not something you can self-serve on. And so that flexibility is a big help generally, but the more the problems can be
for
self-served
sure. Yeah, and like that's a good point you made too, right? Like it's if I have all that information in one place and I don't have something, I don't have to worry about did I miss something? Did I miss an email or did I not look in the correct spot, which could lead to you reaching out to a pair when you didn't really need to, right? You don't want to aggravate that relationship that you talked about earlier. So again, if all that information is in one place and I have this specific thing that's not present that I know I need to, apply this cash. That's also kind of telling for me, hey, I need to reach out to this customer. I have everything here, but I'm missing this one piece. I know exactly what I need to go out to them to reach for.
All right. Uh, as we move to the next one, I want to thank people. I wanted to thank those who responded to my question about ETL and ingesting. Some good history there. Our second poll question is what are your biggest concerns when integrating new receivables technology? First one is disruption to existing workflows, all the way down to other or ensure. Select all that apply, and that would be a great way to let yourself know you're done, hit submit, and then that information will go to the poll results that we'll all see at the same time. So that will be excellent. Brian has been keeping busy tabulating Deluxes using AI to take out the people who typed in Deluxe 4 times. Kidding. I don't know how he's doing it. It's magic. He can do that. So there's 23 more. We need 23 more to get our 175. So looking forward to that. And it's it's good business. I look forward to seeing the poll responses as soon as enough people have submitted.
And this is an interesting one.
Yeah. Biggest concerns. Now, don't say what your biggest concern is, but as soon as it pops up, I want you to say what you think will be the biggest concern without reading the numbers. But as soon as it pops up, I don't want you to influence the poll and no cheating. How's that?
That's good.
Okay.
I'll just hide it off the screen here a little bit.
Okay, it's coming up. What's your vote?
Mine was cost and ROI uncertainty. So that's actually, it looks like third on the list.
It's third. It's third.
Yeah.
You're an honest man. That's good. Right. But any comments on this? Because number one is complexity of integration with the European bank systems. Some companies are dealing with many banks that may have lots of receivables across numerous banks. That could be the case. And then the disruption, change management process challenges is number two. Any high level comments on this?
Yeah, actually, I love number one. So complexity of integration with the European bank systems, because like this is just something, I deal with every day, right? So like you said, there could be a customer that has multiple ERPs, or again, they're dealing with multiple banks. So traditionally, right, you're having to force these different groups, which really aren't collecting revenue on what's happening, to format a file to a specific type, just so your system can ingest it, right? So there is a lot of complexity there in gathering the requirements, testing of the files, pieces like that. And again, like the newer systems are moving to a much more open-ended normalization or transformer for these files. So we can just, kind of take whatever is raw coming from these systems or these standard payment file formats and ingest the data that way. So that's great to see. I think like across the industry, we see a lot of push for, onboarding ease. So using different tools to kind of do those mappings, gather those requirements. I mean, you see a lot of in the legacy world, right? People are using Word documents, Excel documents to collect some of these requirements. And these days it's moved to more like, we're getting to the point where there's kind of digital web forms, where there are smart forms, where they're asking questions based on the services you're specifically looking for. And some of this information could be transformed into a particular format like JSON, which is what API uses to actually provision things. So I've seen just a ton of automation in this space. So it's interesting to see that's like a top concern kind of for the users of these applications. And I think that's good, right? 'Cause like that's the way the industry is also kind of seeing some of those issues, and they're kind of moving forward and rectifying that. So I think especially as API comes much more prominent, both on the banking side and on the ERP side, that'll just go way down as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the explanation and the analysis. Thanks everybody for responding to the second poll question. On this visual, you can see this fairly complex flow chart. I just want to explain the layout a little bit and then let Nathan go through in a more detailed step through of where to look for opportunities for innovation of the flow charts or to explain it. On the left-hand side, Near the top, you can see different payment rails and then things like outstanding AR invoices. So you can see lockbox, ways of processing, how information comes in. Then you see information about data. So data can come from a number of sources, either separate or together with the payment. Then you can see related flows, and you can see lockbox operation with the blue, some feedback loops and other activity in the green, and then matching, validation, posting, archival, and all those flows coming out through the black lines connecting that activity. So that's the quick layout, and now Nathan will touch on it in some detail.
For sure, right? So think of this as like this is an automated beginning to end, basically of payment information coming in, and then how we're posting that to an ERP or billing system. So again, typically these are handled by teams in like a manual or traditional way. And as they kind of adopt these cash application or to get receivables products, right, a lot of this can be automated. So as you talked about on the left side there, right, you've got your payment sources coming in. And you'll notice after all those payment sources there or the invoice information, it all goes through data normalization, right? And these sources of data are already put into kind of like, payment file formats or field information. So they don't need to go through the OCR, which is just below that data normalization, but you will see things like email remittance. So, imagine you have a mailbox set up, and you provide that to your payers. So as they're paying their bills, they know if they need to send in remittance advice via email, they send it to a particular mailbox. And that mailbox is, actually, part of your cash application suite. It's taking in those emails. It's running it through an OCR service to turn those written emails into field information that can be used in matching. And then after it goes through that OCR process and it's grabbed that info, it also goes through that data normalization process. And we see in some of the solutions today too, like you can also have the ability to just drop in a file. So if you have a piece of remittance that you've, gotten through other means, like someone's just transferred it to you or you've made it yourself, you're dropping that directly into the application. And again, it would go through OCR and data normalization. And then, especially on like the lockbox side of it, is you're getting those images scanned. So think like the check, the stub, the coupon, an envelope, and just a piece of written correspondence on a spare piece of paper. All those sort of things can also be dropped into OCR, so nobody has to key that information in. It can be scanned automatically, go through that data normalization layer, and basically all those different payment sources or rails of information are now available in a singular spot. And you can do there's like an archive basically that can store all that. You can generate reports, do dashboarding on it, and you can see that information even like at a pre-match state. Some of that will then get kicked over to a matching service or the bulk of it. There is that top box there which talks about collections and other OTC workflows. So again, that's like, an invoice has come in, it's aged out, no payment has come in for it. You can automatically be triggered to go to like a collection workflow. So there's a whole slew of other activities can go that way, but I'll focus on the matching side of it. So once all that data has basically come in, right, we go into the matching service here. And typically in a lot of these models, you can kind of set up your own kind of thresholds for what can be automatically matched, what needs just, yeah, that looks good to me. Let's validate that and push that through as a match, or what gets sent into like a full-blown exception queue and then needs to be worked manually through a UI. So you can see like high confidence matches there. So these are things like, let's say the rules or the machine learning model had like a 99 or greater percent confidence in the match, that can just be a straight through match. We'll match that automatically, and that'll be then archived as like a matched item. Let's say you set up your, validation threshold as, let's say, 98% to 80%. So anything that was matched within that threshold, it can go to another page where it's a list of everything that the system thinks it is matched, and all a user has to do is say, yes, this is a match, yes, this is a match. And typically there's even like a feedback back into the machine learning model at that point, where it can say, hey, okay, this was approved as a match by the user. If I see a similar sort of transaction come in, like let's say next month, it's a repeat transaction, I know how to handle this and I can convert this now into a straight through match. And even that carries over into the exception side. So let's say had a payment but couldn't find anything that it should be matched with. That can be thrown into like an exception queue, which can then be worked manually by a user. And again, you've still got all that information there, so it's easier to solve this exception. And then whatever the user had done to fix it or make sure it could be applied, that's also feedback that can go into the machine learning model. So again, maybe next time it comes through, it can be a straight through match or even just be into like a validation match. So basically I kind of, and again, this is pretty high level. There's definitely, more granularity to it, but just want to kind of convey the various approaches and how kind of this waterfall works. And then all that information is then archived. And again, you can do reporting on that. You could see, let's say, month over month, how your automatic straight-through match rate is improved, or how much faster you're able to get this catch, what you've lowered your average DSO by, things like that. And at the very end there, we've got that SFTP extract or AR API. So typically we still see that SFTP of a file, so like a posting file or an extract being created by the system and then sent over via SFTP to the billing system. But we are having some now where it's API integration as well. So rather than having to send a file, we can just integrate into the ERP, and as the matches go through, we can close those off automatically.
Excellent, Nathan. There's a number of questions that have come in. Some are fairly product specific, but ask this one. It's does in this type of model, does the system, because you got that feedback loop to the ML model, does the system remember unmatch or what was matched by a user or the machine earlier? Does it keep track of those points of distinction?
Yeah, typically like there can be like a full match, a partial match, an unmatch. So those are like reportable fields or values in the system. And then you can get like an itemized list of either the transactions or the items that fall under those categories. And typically, like in a lot of these services, in multiple ones that I've seen too, there is like an audit service that's running in the background. So if someone's doing something actionable against something within the platform, whether it's, doing a match or even just running a report, these sort of auditing services will capture that information. So you can like run a report afterwards and you can see what users have done what activities.
Thank you. Thanks for that. We move on to our last slide before our final poll question. That's quite the lead up to it. This is about data and AI. Nathan, I'll have some comments on this, but I'd like you to talk us through how you store data, use AI, how people should think about that in the receivables context from a data view.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So data these days is more valuable than ever, right? Like especially again, as AI and ML models have become more prevalent in across all industries, really, the data is the value. So basically having a singular place where that data is organized very efficiently. So something like a machine learning model can interact with it at scale is highly important. So it's typically, like, especially when you're working with some of these vendors like AWS or Microsoft Azure, they have these, giant cloud platforms. They have a lot of these tools that can be used by like products like ours or other companies to ingest data at a very high scale. And they can do it in a redundant way. Typically, you see a lot of the architecture these days, which is something called like microservices. So when you go into an application, you might have like a Cash App service, or you might have like a Cash App page, you might have like a reports page, you might have like a dashboarding page. These are all kind of individual applications within these microservices. So like each one is its own microservice, and all that communication happens between them via API as well. So as the data comes into the system, it's stored in, you'll see in this little red box here, it says centralized data platform with data lake. So all the data is in that data lake, and then all these services can independently interact with this data. And there's various levels of like filtering that can be applied with things like called, gateways or public gateways. So you can combine like requests across multiple services. So it's very interesting on the architecture side of it. But basically, this allows us to get in data from any source, normalize it again, regardless of source, and then store that in a highly scalable way. And then things like machine learning models can run against it. And you can do interesting things. So like, let's say you have two ERPs. So the machine learning model has to understand that the logic it should be applying between the two different ERPs should be slightly different, right? Maybe some of the fields are set up differently. One ERP is for a completely different line of business, and there's a different level of importance on what field should be used in matching. So when you're working between a data lake and then like a machine learning model, you can have mechanisms in between that pass along. Hey, this is slightly different. When you're applying your logic to these sort of transactions, I want you to use this lens to do so. So it's pretty interesting the level of flexibility you can have. But again, it all starts with having that normalized data centralized within a data lake that efficiently allows you to read or parse that data. And then on the right-hand side here, we've got some additional bits, AI-powered receivables platform. So there's other things you can do. And I think I talked a little bit about it, but right, insights of this data. So we can do that cash application, matching the payments, bringing in remittances from a bunch of places. But there's also those insights you can derive from it all. So again, we can talk about, which of your customers has increased the most in revenue, which of your customers is a bit of a pain. So, they don't pay their bills on time, or they have a lot that go to collections, or, typically you're generating a dispute, or, a deduction needs to be applied in a lot of the cases here. These are like the sort of insights that can also be, brought out of this data and used proactively to lower your exceptions as well. So on top of the cash application process, which is doing a lot of that bulk work, we can also proactively work with these insights to actually reduce any of the errors or exceptions that are generated in the long run as well. And you see this actually in cash application a lot, where you'll start off with kind of like a base match rate, and then over time, as like the model, or even if you're using a hybrid where there's some rules in there as well, as those are refined, that match rate goes up. An interesting thing, even with the machine learning side of it, right, is you can take historical data out of like an ERP or billing system. So let's say I take the last 6 months of invoices that have been closed, and I can take, like, say, that customer catalog. Those sort of chunks of information you can load into these systems as well for that machine learning model to parse, and that'll even give it like a bit of a kickstart in how it does some of its matching logic. So it's pretty interesting. And I've seen some instances where even, like, think Chat GPT, there'll be like a mechanism like that inside the platform. And you can like type in a query, say like, hey, which of my customers has create the highest DSO. And then it'll generate a response based off that data that's localized within that data lake. So there's just really interesting things that are kind of happening in the industry, I'd say, at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for stepping through that. And so this is an explanation, and that we made this a little more generic than just the Deluxe platform, so that the concept is there, specifically, or generally. But I do want to emphasize one of the aspects. So the centralized data platform is, instead of having data in different systems that you can't access, now when it's combined in a spot, it's not just moving from place to place with partial data, it's all combined. And then when you say data is more valuable, why did Nathan say data is more valuable? There's the ability to do additional analysis, whether it's using AI or other activities. You now have that in a particular place that you can roll against it, as opposed to, now I've got to gather it. Now it's gathered, it's normalized, it's linked, it's set up, and you can apply those other tools to it. So it's more of a platform view than a process view. And I mean, there's a process that goes into it, but now you've got this platform that allows you to act on it. And that's the much more modern approach to handling processes and leveraging data, is putting it in that type of format. So, he highlighted opportunities for innovation. Well, the opportunities for innovation that's here is because of this design, or this leveraged core data. So just think about how people strategize for that. And while you're thinking about that for a second, immediately turn your eyeballs to areas of innovation. Which innovation area are you most interested in exploring further? Like, which one piques your interest the most? AI-powered matching, exception handling, real-time cash flow insights, unified data models, and cloud-native platforms. Understand that data model, end-to-end, order to collect, workflow automation, all the above, other, or unsure. So that gives you some options. Like, what do you think? Like, answer what's most important to you, but also spend a moment thinking what you believe the audience will respond. I think that'd be interesting for everybody to put down what they're thinking. While you're completing that, or after you're done, I have a link in the chat box. It says follow Craig on LinkedIn. You can send me an invite. I will accept it. And it says strategic treasure. That goes to me. Probably should have set that to the company, but I guess that's what happens when you set it up first. So I'd love to connect with you if you're not connected there. And
one of those
Nathan,
processes that's just working, right, Craig?
just set it up there earlier, and that's what it is. Maybe it should say Craig Jeffery, but it says strategic treasure. So there you go. All right. So areas of innovation. Nathan, number one is AI powered matching and exception handling. I would have thought that was pretty. That that's to be expected. The way you
Yeah.
described it, that piqued my interest even more, and I was already interested. Number two is real-time cash flow insights. That is, do you think that's higher because we have more treasury people on here than AR people?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely I would have thought AI powered would have been probably greater than 44%, especially considering the last poll. But I
Hmm.
could see that for sure, right? Those insights are driving a lot of the business decision or directing or direction. I know we've got a lot of those treasury folks on the call. That just makes sense.
Okay.
Um, One thing that's interesting too, if you know, there's a lot of interest on the AI powered matching and exception handling side of it. Even just, you know, using something like Chat GPT, you can have it create payment files, like just, you know, give it a format, and you can ask for it to even like sprinkle in errors, you know, purposefully, and then have it generate things like an OpenAR file, and it'll even do things like matching within the model there. And obviously it's basic, but you can kind of see the power of what it can do and how it'll handle some of the use cases. So it's kind of interesting actually. It's kind of like a very basic way just to interface with that side of it and see some of the power of what an ML model can do these days.
Nice. All right. So we've got the last little stretch. We can see the end, and I'll start us off. You know, what's the path to full automation? This idea of your platform, your system partner that you're using. You begin with a platform, move to integrated receivables. You know, if we just look there, you know, this idea of, you know, historical, I capture payment information, and we do an image archive if there's a check, but all that data gets captured in there. You have your standard dashboards and reports that people are always looking for. It exists there. As we move and continue, we see things like I want all the different flows to come in through one type of channel, whether it's coming from different payment rails, it's digital, it's paper-based. I want to convert those to digital to a single channel. I don't want 3 feeds, 5 feeds, 12 feeds, 20 feeds. I want all of that normalized and coming in to make sense of it. And so that allows you to expand with more materials, more data, single feedback to the ERP to post receivables. That's a good way to start. Um, Nathan, you want to pick up there? You want me to go a little bit farther, or
Yeah, for sure. I can go through the partial
okay?
and the other one as well. So yeah, it's like partial cash application, right? Customers typically providing an open invoice file, and then with the payment information that it was made available within the platform, typically cash application can still be run. Obviously, it's not going to give you the full effect when you get into something like full cash application, where you're breaking in those additional exception workflows. You're using more of a like the AI powered rather than like a simple ML that's only seeing parts of the data. You have like an ML that's got access to all the data. You can, you know, bring in those extra remittances like the email remittance capture pieces like that. The jump between partial and full really is, you know, I just have a lot more of the data at my fingertips. And if something's identified that can't be a straight through match, we have additional workflows to kind of handle those fringe cases, which was, you know, a popular concern. And I think that second poll as well. And then above and beyond that, right, you get into the really fancy stuff like the AI dashboard. So again, using like a chat GPT or a generative AI model where you can speak to it in natural language and ask it questions and it'll look at the data and provide you answers. You know, it's a very powerful tool these days. And you can get to things like cash flow, forecasting and predictive analysis. And then again, it can use additional data sources. You know, some of the things I've seen as POCs and some tools is like, you know, being able to connect into like a credit system, right? So even as you're bringing or onboarding new customers, you can kind of almost do like a credit analysis of, you know, are these low, high risk? Are these, you know, a good customer to have? So these even like very upfront actions that can be taken with like kind of AI dashboard tools. And then finally, right, the OTC workflows in its totality. So you get into things like collections, credit management, deductions, disputes, and I see a lot of action around the deduction side of it, especially depending on the business. If it's like, you know, something that's dealing with like food, right? You know, you've taken a delivery or shipment of food, and there's some waste there. There's typically a deduction applied. So there's a lot of instances where deductions play a big part as well. Um, and then also integrating things like customer communication tools. So if you're dealing with collections, you know, the platform itself has the ability to handle that communication. automated messaging for like a first or a second level of, it's past a certain time, and then triggering the users to say, hey, you actually just need to call this person. So it's kind of like, yeah, this is kind of like a layered approach to how you can fully evolve your kind of order to cash workflow.
Excellent. So this moves us to a case study, and so we're gonna pick up our pace slightly. We'll go 1.3 times. I asked Nathan to provide a case study. Maybe you could do a quick overview of what the situation was and what the results were.
Sure. So this was a large wholesale distributor, and on the left-hand side there, you can see they were doing multiple types of payments, right? So their straight-through posting, I think, on paper payments was about 85%, and then on the electronic ones, it was 20%, right? Like things like ACH, they're typically not coming with the full identity data to make that match. So they did receive a daily auto posting file transmission, so like and then most payers, I think I mentioned this, were not sending required addenda, needed to auto post the incoming ACH payments. So they were getting in about 5,720 payments against 33,660 invoices, because you might get a payment that covers multiple invoices. So integrating kind of a Cash App product here, right, which uses AI ML, they were able to reduce their time spent on Cash application by about 50%. So again, if you have a team of 10 people, you've now freed up like 5 of those people to work on other tasks, and their straight through processing rate went from 86 to 92%, I think, depending on the month when we were looking at it. So again, this is just freeing up employees to do other tasks or focus on other pieces. And it was great to see kind of that level of reduction in the manual time spent applying cash.
All right, we're on our final thoughts slide. Nathan's going to take the first two. I'll take the last one.
Yeah, so cash application, right? That's like again, essential for healthy receivables processing and cash flow, helps solve for the messy middle of B2B payments and priorities for a successful cash application. So this is kind of like the core of integrated receivables for me, right? This is, you're taking away that bulk of the manual work of taking payments and applying it to cash. So I love to see this, and as we introduce these products to customers, right? It's always great to see. I think they're, like we mentioned before, they're a little bit worried about what the actual impact would see, but when they start seeing their straight through processing rate climb, it's always a great feeling. Um, and for pitfalls of integration, right? Again, I think whatever tool you're going with, make sure you have the ability to do like UAT testing, right? So the platform is set up, your data is being normalized. So regardless of where the payment sources are coming in, you can see all that data in one place. And then you can test that out in a UAT environment, right? Before you make that swap. You want to make sure all your employees are on board and they're all feeling safe with this change, because it is a drastic change for some. So you want to make sure whatever tool you're onboarding, everybody feels as comfortable as possible.
All right, and so the opportunities for automation, I'm just going to comment on the last two items, just as a way of leaving this fresh in your mind. The unifying data models, or this platform view, allows you to use some of these really good tools, AI, machine learning. And since the data is gathered in one place, it's easier to do traditional activity as well. The last point is, as we had stepped through the path to full receivables, we saw this step and progression, this evolution of super manual to a unified, integrated, full receivables process. Recognize that maybe you can make the jump all at once. Maybe you have to make several steps at a time, but that you're moving your organization from the left to the right. In that organization, there's a lot of opportunity. So we'll leave it there. Thank you, Nathan, for great comments and really good sharing of a ton of good information. So really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for responding to the poll questions. I know there's a few questions we didn't get back to you. So we'll try to do that by email. I'll turn it back over to Brian with our thanks. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Brian?
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Nathan. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The CTP and FP&A credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And for more on modernizing receivables, be sure to listen to the Treasury Update podcast, episode 364 with Deluxe, by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.